Hello everyone, welcome to the video for chapter 11, which is all about understanding approach charts. So Rod starts out this chapter describing the process whereby they can create some instrument approaches and how that works. It's a pretty interesting deal. Of course, he also encourages you to find out more by buying his, other instrument flying book. A little self-promotion there. Never hurt anybody, I guess. But anyway, he walks you through an instrument approach that's, way out in California. Most of you probably never fly an approach out there. And I wanted to try to do something similar, using something a little closer by. So I've gone ahead and ran on over to AirNav, and I looked up N79, Northumberland County. Now, if you're not familiar with AirNav, I'm sure most of you probably are. It'll give you information about airports and show you what chart they're on. It will also give you things like instrument approaches into that airport. So I'll notice there's a VOR runway 8. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, make it a little larger. Okay, so here we have our instrument approach. And, he goes through these different sections, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through this approach. This approach is for Northumberland County, which is in Shamokin, Pennsylvania. So you'll see that right here at the top. It says Shamokin, Pennsylvania. And over here we have the heading section. This is the VOR runway 8 approach. And then underneath there, it says Northumberland County N79. Right. So that's telling me what airport. This is telling me the city. By the way, sometimes there's little politics in these cities. When I was down in Atlanta, you'd have some people that said, hey, we don't want to be listed as Marietta or Kennesaw, Georgia. We want to be listed as Atlanta, Georgia, even if they weren't actually in Atlanta, because they were like, well, we're in the metro Atlanta area. And, then, where do you show up in the book of charts if you buy your charts that way? It's kind of a political thing. But anyway, that's just a little aside. So these top 3 sections here are called the briefing sections. So the first briefing section has procedural information. It'll tell you things like the type of approach and the nav aid and the frequency, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a VOR DME off the Selinsgrove VOR, which has a frequency of 110.4, a TACAN channel of 41. If you think back to when we discussed DME, we said that if you have a TACAN, it automatically has DME associated with it, and TACAN has a channel, and there is a mapping between the VOR frequency and the appropriate DME channel that would also apply to a TACAN. The approach course into the runway is 88 degrees. The runway has a landing distance of 3,297 feet and a touchdown zone elevation of 879 feet. So touchdown zone elevation, as a reminder, is the highest point in the first 3,000 feet of a runway. The airport elevation is 881. So that's the highest usable point on any runway. That's the difference between touchdown zone elevation and the airport elevation. What about the second briefing area? Second briefing area will provide you with takeoff, departure information, alternate information, notes, limitations, and things like missed approach procedures. So here there's a T. The T says that there is a departure procedure or alternate takeoff minimums. Now, if you are flying as a private pilot, you're not flying commercially as part of a 121 or 135 operation, or the takeoff minimums don't really apply to you. You can legally take off in 00. It's incredibly stupid to do so, but you can legally do it. The A, we talked about the A before, and we talked about alternates. Now, when you see NA after the A, that means not authorized. You may not file this as an alternate. It doesn't have alternate minimums. It's just full stop. You cannot file this as an alternate. At least you can't file Northumberland as an alternate if this is the only approach you can do there. There may be other approaches that you're allowed to do to fly into Northumberland. Okay, and it says helicopter visibility reduction below 1 statute mile not applicable. So if you want to fly a helicopter into there, you still have to have 1 statute mile visibility. Procedure not authorized at night. When local altimeter setting not received, use Selinsgrove altimeter setting and increase all MDAs, minimum descent altitudes, 100 feet. Then there is a textual description of the missed approach procedure. Climbing left turn to 4,000, direct, Selinsgrove VOR DME, and hold. So that's what happens if you have to go missed. Okay, the next briefing section. Next briefing section is going to have communication information. AWOS 3, we just talked about in the last chapter what that means. So they claim to have an AWOS 3 system, although the reality is it's been broken for a very long time, and I don't know if it'll ever get fixed. But if it works, you can get it on 119.175. Incidentally, these bits of information are normally given in the same order that you would need them. So I want to get the weather. Maybe if I'm taking off or approaching this airport, I might talk to Harrisburg Approach. Here's their frequencies. Here's the Unicom frequency. And then lastly, the pilot controlled lighting is on 121.8, not 122.8. You might say, why is that? Possibly because it's pretty close to Bloomsburg. And Bloomsburg is also on 122.8, and having pilot controlled lighting for both on the same frequency could be bad. So those are the briefing areas. Then we have this major portion of the approach, and this is what we call the plan view. It's kind of the bird's eye view of your approach. So what do we see there? We see the different paths. We'll come back to some of this in a little bit. But I have here my initial approach fix, IAF. It's also an intermediate approach fix of Selinsgrove VOR in a couple of courses. And then I have over here in the corner my MSA, my minimum sector altitude from the Selinsgrove VOR and out 25 nautical miles. I need to be at 3,400 feet in this portion and 3,700 feet in this portion. What does that mean? This is telling me, let's say I get lost. I don't know where I'm at. I know I'm in that general area. How high do I have to climb to make sure I'm not going to hit anything? That's what MSA is telling me. As I said, we'll come back to the rest of this in a bit. Okay, other components in my approach plate. Here I have my profile view, my view from the side, if you will. This is where I have altitudes, and it's going to tell me what are the altitudes for this approach. And then I have, in the corner, I have my icons. What do the icons tell me? The icons will tell me things such as a graphical version of the missed approach procedure, which is exactly what I have here. Climbing left turn to 4,000 feet, direct to the Seal and Scroll VOR, and hold. Notice that was what the text up here said. It's the same. So this is my sideways view, my profile view. Below that, I have my minimums. And we're going to come back and drill down on all of this. So if I'm flying straight in to runway 8, here are my minimums. If I'm circling, here are my minimums. Over here to the right, we have the aerodrome sketch. Rod actually somewhat incorrectly called this the airport sketch, but it's actually officially known as the aerodrome sketch. At the top, I have the elevation and touchdown zone elevation for this approach. You'll see the runway, and you'll see this little arrow that shows me my approach path to the end of the runway. Now, this approach to a runway, what does that mean? That means that depending on what kind of an approach it is, that the difference between my inbound course and the runway heading is either less than 15 degrees or less than 30 degrees. And then it's an approach to a runway. If I cannot meet that criteria, I will have an approach to an airport. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. There's a reason why I didn't start with Bloomsburg. So here at the bottom, I have things like the runway lights. I have MERLs, medium intensity runway lights for runway 826. I have rail lights for runway 8 and 26. It's a little picture. It's kind of hard for you to see, I'm guessing, on your screens. Here's the beacon, and it has things like VASI and PAPIs, etc., etc. And it's telling me about the slope. You probably already knew there was a slope on this runway. And finally, down here in the corner of the aerodrome sketch, I will have things like my time and distance tables. So I have a final approach fix, and the difference in distance between that and the missed approach point is 5.1 nautical miles. And it will tell me if I'm going these speeds, how long it will take me to fly that distance. Assuming, of course, that I have this much ground speed, not airspeed. So how does this work? If I do not have a way to identify the missed approach point, there are some approaches where I have to time. I recall the 5 T's we talked about: turn, time, twist, throttle, talk. So I pass my final approach fix. I start my timer. I try to fly approximately one of these speeds. And if I exceed the time, then I can go missed. That is if I do not have an alternative way of identifying the missed approach point. Okay, and then down at the bottom, we have once again that same information repeated. We also have this thing was amended. We have coordinates for our airport, and on the sides, you'll see what edition is this? What book is this from? So this is good until May 21st of this year, and it's telling me all of that. You might say, well, of course it's good because I just downloaded it. Remember, you can buy the books of approach plates, and it's not obvious then. You can also get them as bound charts and as loose leaf. When I actually still bought charts, I always bought loose leaf because they're so much easier to deal with. You can take out the approach plates that you need for a particular flight, and then you can say, all right, these are the ones that I need. Now let me have a look at this and say, all right, here's things from my point of departure. Right? There's a little aside in Rod's book about somebody that took off and had to go back to the place they just departed from. You should always have those approach plates handy. You should be familiar with the approaches in the place you just departed from in case you have to go back. You should have off the approach plates for your destination and any alternates as well. Right? So there shouldn't be a lot of drama. What is instrument flying about? Learning how to fly with precision and being organized, being prepared. And that's a big part about being a good instrument pilot. Okay, so let's drill down here a little bit more. We'll start with the plan view. So again, it's a bird's eye view for your approach. Now, many of these approaches will have a little circle. Typically, it's about a 10 nautical mile circle. Sometimes it's 15, it's a little bigger. And Rod talks about some of those differences. Right? I could have a 20-hour class on nothing but talking about instrument approach plates, and we would still not cover every possibility. We're going for kind of the more common stuff and more common basic things that you're likely to find. And beyond that, there's other ways of figuring out some of these obscure symbols and other things that you might see from time to time. All right, so this one doesn't have the circle. When there is a circle, what that tells you is everything inside the circle is to scale. Everything outside the circle may not be to scale. That's what it's telling you. So here, the bold line is my normal path, if you will. That is my instrument approach, what it looks like from the start, from above. And the dashed line here indicates my missed approach path. So remember, it was a climbing left turn, direct to this VOR and hold. Now, when we talked about holds, we said that sometimes you will see a hold as a course reversal, as a way to get you turned around. You might fly toward the airport and then fly out from the airport, turn around and go back. We said there was one way to do that using something called a procedure turn, which we haven't talked about yet. Another way to do that is a holding pattern entry. Let's say maybe I even started at Selinsgrove and I'm just trying to do a practice approach. Probably fly to this VOR at Selinsgrove, and now I'm going to enter this hold as appropriate, and it tells me my headings. So my inbound heading is 088. It's on the 268 radial off of the VOR. And this is also my heading in toward the airport, 088. I'm outbound in my hold. My heading's going to be 268, the reciprocal of that. No surprise there. It tells me this is Selinsgrove VOR. Here's the frequency, TACAN channel, and Morse code. It is my initial approach fix, and it's also an intermediate fix. What does that mean? I fly in, let's say I'm flying in from this direction. I do some sort of holding pattern entry. So I initially had a fix of the VOR, and then I did my holding pattern entry, and I come back around, and then I head in and toward the airport. Well, now it's an intermediate fix. It's in the middle, right? So if you read the chapter, you should understand intermediate fixes, final approach fixes, and initial approach fixes. Also, you'll notice there is an intersection, Amby intersection, which is 10 miles from the Selinsgrove VOR. That's what this is telling me here. It says there's a little lightning bolt. That is telling me this is the final approach fix. We'll see other indications of that a little bit later. The other thing you'll notice is it says no PT, no procedure turn for arrival on Selinsgrove VOR DME airway radials 204 to 320. All right, so if you're on 204 to 320, they're basically saying just fly that VOR and just fly in. No procedure turn, which is nice, I suppose. Okay, other things you see here. Here's some bodies of water. You probably know that this is the Susquehanna River. And we have these little triangles. These are indicating that we have obstacles. Some of them say plus or minus. Plus or minus means they're not exactly sure if it's exactly 1851, like this guy here. And you might say, well, how come they don't know that? Well, maybe it's a tree and trees grow. So that's why they don't know that for certain. Rod talks about things like how do they determine, what altitudes you have to be at and, where the holding pattern is. And that's just really dependent on what's around you. Rising terrain around you, is it everything's kind of flat? What's the story there? Unfortunately, we don't have a very flat area around here. So some of the approaches into our airports aren't the best in terms of getting you down really low. And if the weather's really bad, you probably won't be getting back into Bloomsburg that day. Okay, so that is the plan view. What about the profile view? Profile view is telling you what things look like from the side. So here where we see 4,000 with a line under it, that means when I'm here, when I'm outbound in my hold, I'm heading out at 268. Or, if I'm doing a different hold entry, I'm heading outbound. I'm trying to get established in this hold. To do that at or above 4,000 feet. It's okay to be higher. You don't want to be super high because then it's hard to get down when you get cleared for this approach. And it says 1 minute holding pattern. So there'll be a DME distance. You'll notice it also says 1 minute up here in the plan view. Okay, then coming back inbound, now cross over the VOR, 3,500 is my minimum altitude. Then I'm going to be descending on a heading of 88. I get to AMB intersection, which is 10 miles from the VOR. And I know that is also true here. And I see the lightning bolt here. And here I see the Maltese cross. Those both tell me the same thing. They say, you are a final approach fix. So from there, I want to descend a little bit more. So from the VOR, 3,500, to 10 miles away, I can descend down to 2,600. Now, a lot of people would ask, how should I do that descent? Okay, also notice here it says the threshold crossing height, TCH, is 40 feet. And to go from here to the threshold, to the missed approach point, is going to be a 3.16 degree glide slope. So it's not the standard 3 degrees. That's telling me that I have to descend a little bit more than a standard descent. If I'm doing 90 knots over the ground, I should probably descend a little bit more than 500 foot per minute to get down to my minimum altitude. 15.1 miles from the VOR, that's when I'm going to go missed. And that's showing me I'm climbing up. This little black line here, that represents the runway. We'll see 15.1 miles from the VOR. So it's 10 miles to that AMB intersection, and then 5.1 from there to the end of the runway. And again, here in the aerodrome sketch, shows me my path into the runway. That's within 30 degrees. So no problems there. Also within this section, I have categories. Categories are what is your stall speed. So your stall speed determines the categories. And you can find those in your book. It will talk about, okay, what is going to determine that, right? Also mentions, let's say that you are flying higher than 1.3 times your stall speed. I decide I want to fly my approach at 120 knots instead of 90. That's going to put me kind of close to the edge of category C. I should probably use these new minimums if I'm going to fly at a faster speed, even though I don't have to, So it's, determined by your stall speed, but It's really determined by the speed at which you intend to fly this approach. I used to fly approaches 120 knots all the time in my Arrow. Worked out just great. If you were a little bit in a hurry, it would get you there. You could also fly them at 90. That worked just as well. But if I flew it at a faster speed, I had to keep in mind that I might want to have higher minimums. So since this is an approach to a runway, it will tell me for a straight in approach to runway 8, if I'm category A, nice and slow, my minimum descent altitude, MDA, is 1980, and I need 1.25 miles visibility. What is that height? Height above the ground, 1101. That's what it's telling me. Because my touchdown zone elevation was 879. At 1101 to 879, I'm going to get 1980. If you're wondering what these things are in parentheses, those are for military pilots. So that's probably not you. They have different visibility minimums. Say, how come they have 1100 feet instead of 1101? Well, they have radar altimeters typically. So they're not going to have that extra 1 foot in there. They're probably going to round a little bit. Circling approach, what does that mean? Let's say the winds are blowing straight down runway 26, and either you can't do the approach for 26 or there is no approach for 26. What are you going to do? You're going to do this approach, you're going to get down low, and then you're going to circle. Circling, you'll notice that the minimums are exactly the same, which is a little bit unusual, but that's the way that it is. It's a little bit unusual. Well, that's the way that it is because look at these minimums. These minimums are obscenely high. Kind of like Bloomsburg. It has to be better than VFR to get there. All right. One thing I will say about circling. Sometimes people come in and they're circling to land on a different runway. By the way, you can circle back to the same runway. That's allowed. You might say, why would I do that? You came in and you saw the runway, but you were super high. You're crossing the threshold and you're like, there's just no way. There's no way I'm going to make it in there. You're allowed to circle back to the same runway. Nobody says you have to land on 26. But regardless of what you're doing, keep close to the airport. Do not feel like you have to fly a normal pattern, especially if it's IMC. Right? You can keep it super tight. You have to be within a mile of that airport. You know, if there's 1.25 miles visibility requirement, don't be flying 2 miles away. That would be a really bad thing. You might hit some terrain. You never know. So that is this portion of your approach plate. And then back to aerodrome sketch. It's pretty much just a picture. And you can see some of the different symbols. And if I have things like, different kinds of approach lighting, it will show me that on my approach chart. Some other things that you'll see. And honestly, I think one of the best ways to learn any of this is just to grab a couple of approach charts and look at it. Right, so I'm going to go from here. I'm going to go back. I'm going to say, let's look at N13. I have a VOR alpha approach. Remember that the alpha means that, hey, I don't have approach to a runway. It's an approach to an airport. Whenever you see a dash and then a letter, that's telling you this is an approach to an airport, not to a runway. So same story. We can brief the approach. This is for Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. It is the VOR Alpha approach to Bloomsburg Municipal, which is November 13. It's based off of a VORTAC MIP, the Milton VOR, on frequency 109.2. Channel 29 for the TACAN. Approach course is 108. Runway landing NA, because there's no runway. This is an approach to an airport. Same for touchdown zone elevation. And the airport elevation is 481. Looking at the next briefing section, once again, there's departure procedures or alternative takeoff minimums that exist because it's not an awesome approach, to be honest. Okay, and again, not authorized as an alternate because you don't get down very low. And a little bit more about it. Helicopter visibility reduction below 1 statute mile, not applicable. Procedure not applicable at night. Use Williamsport altimeter setting. Another reason why you can't go that low. Missed approach, climbing left turn to 4000 direct to MIP, VORTAC, and hold. Here are my frequencies. Wilkes-Barre approach control 126.3 and the Unicom 122.8, which also controls the lighting. That's what the L tells me. If I look at the plan view, starting with my minimum sector altitude, it is 3,900 feet within 20 miles, or 25 miles, I should say, of the Milton VOR. I can see it's right here. Milton VOR is once again my intermediate and initial approach fixes. And it has all the information there. Once again, I have a holding pattern, my path in to the airport. Here's my final approach fix of Rydor intersection, which is 6 miles from Milton. And it tells me no procedure turn for arrival at MIP on airway radial 289. So if I'm flying down the airway that happens to have this heading of 109, I don't have to do a procedure turn. And you'll notice there are 2 ways to identify Rydor. I can either use DME or I can use the Selinsgrove VOR. So that's an alternative. And depending on the equipment that I have, most people don't have DME, at least an explicit DME anymore, but I could have a DME in the fact that I have a IFR certified GPS. So if I have an IFR certified GPS, that can be used as a substitute for DME. Or if I have dual VORs, I could do this as well. Same story, there is no circle giving me the scale, but it does show me the river, shows me obstacles all around the airport. And my missed approach point is Chorus, which is 10.3 miles away from the VOR. If I go down to my profile view, I have a 1 minute holding pattern, just like I did on the last one, going outbound at 4,000 or above on 289, inbound on 109. Once I cross the VOR, I start my descent down to 2,300, and I can't go below that till I get to Rydor, which is 6 miles away. And then I can descend to my minimum altitude from there. And you'll notice I have a pretty steep approach, 3.88 degrees, with a threshold crossing height of 40. Down to Chorus. And if I make it to Chorus, I have to go missed, if I don't see anything at least. Missed approach procedures, climbing left turn to 4,000, direct to MIP. And down here I have my approach minimums. And of course, there's only circling minimums because it is not an approach to a runway. So if I'm going slow, 1920 and a mile and a quarter. If I'm going a little faster, 1920 and a mile and a half. And guess what? If I'm going too fast I can't even do this approach. So I can't do it at night, and I can't do it if I want to go really, really fast. Over to the aerodrome sketch. Elevation of the airport's 481. Again, there is no threshold crossing height, or touchdown zone elevation, I should say. And you might say, hey, how come this is not an approach to runway 9? Because I'm kind of not turning all that much, right? I'm going from 108 to 90-ish. And that's less than the 30 degrees you told me. Well, this is true, but it's also going to dump you out well above the traffic pattern. So, God bless you. If you think you can arrive at this runway threshold at 1920 feet or 1,439 feet in the air and miraculously land on runway 9. Because I don't think that's going to happen. That is that part. And then, of course, once again, we have the final approach fix to the missed approach point is 4.3 nautical miles. How long does it take to get you at various speeds? So if you don't have a way to identify chorus, which essentially means, in this case, you have DME or an IFR certified GPS, then you have to use the times. What if we try an airport like Hazleton? Hazleton has a couple of different approaches, some GPS approaches. They also have a localizer approach. This is covered more thoroughly in the next chapter, where we get into approach chart analysis. So I'm not going to go there just yet, but just telling you that you can look at different airports, and a really good way to learn about all about these approach charts is to just look at these different airports around you and say, all right, what's the story here? Like, what if I look at Mount Pocono? What kind of approaches do they have into there? They have a VOR DME approach. I can say, is that going to be similar? Yeah, kind of. This one's a little bit different. You pretty much just arrive at the VOR and then fly in. Of course, if I look at the big airports like AVP, they're going to have a lot more approaches. They also have approaches that are based off of ILS or GPS. And you don't see a lot of these little VOR approaches, or, definitely not things like an NDB approach. That is pretty much chapter 11.